Hello and welcome to the show where I try and make a little sense out of this stunning and increasingly brave new world that we all live in by talking to a series of expert witnesses about their experiences, interests and concerns. It's important in life to be in touch with your feelings, but it's also crucial to be able to back those feelings up with facts. And so the purpose of this show is to push past purely personal or political promoting positions, separate fact from fiction and fake news headlines in the hope of uncovering important home truths. And today I'm talking sense not sensibility with psychologist Deborah Powney, who is a PhD candidate researching recovery from intimate partner violence in both female and male victims. Her research and views of domestic abuse are based firmly in robust scientific data, and as such holds the view that domestic abuse is a public health concern and not a gendered issue. She also holds the view, again based on scientific research, that the current popular gendered violence narrative is not only ideological and unscientific, but that it is ultimately harmful not only for male victims, but also for the women it claims to protect. Deborah has recently launched a research project examining the experiences of male victims of domestic abuse, and I'll include some links to more details about this in the low bar. And just in case you haven't already heard the first part of this interview, I'll leave a link to that as well. But now in part 2 of what has been a fascinating chat with Deborah. She talks about her own experiences with domestic abuse, some of the remarkable similarities between feminism and cults, and we begin with an observation about some of the more defensive reactions she sometimes gets when she talks about her approach to researching the experiences of survivors of domestic violence.
I research male and female victims of domestic abuse, regardless of sexuality and regardless of who the perpetrator is. My research is neutral. So the thing that I find funniest, I can't think of a word to describe it, is when I do research about women, and my master's degree thesis was in female sexual violence victims.
Okay.
And it was picked up and used in various places.
Yes.
And by some feminists who hailed it. I actually wrote in there that I would have liked to do some research on male victims. Wasn't any data. So, but the premise of it is really interesting. What I found was really interesting.
Okay.
I have no doubt that it could be transcribed straight over to men.
Sure.
But it was used by various people that would describe themselves as feminists.
Sure.
In that arena, fantastic work, brilliant, exactly what we need, what we're looking for. The minute the exact same researcher opens their mouth and says, you know that men suffer too, and they suffer in line with this, I am absolutely lambasted. It is. And that's where we are within this actual arena, where we can talk about female victims till the sky turns purple.
Yes.
But the second you hint that there might also be some men out there that are feeling, it's not that there's not a conversation that says, oh, we don't think so, why is it you think that? It's an absolute cut at the knee attack. It is so fierce that
very dangerous language to use to even suggest that.
But that in and of itself suggests to me that there's a huge level of disordered thinking going on, because it tends to be the attack of someone who's not who's emotion driven, shall we say. But also it's one of those things that me think the lady does protest too much.
Exactly.
What is this that needs that level of instantaneous attack?
Yes.
Now, in my thesis, one of the things I'm looking at is comparing victims of domestic abuse in the coercive control element to prisoners of war and cult survivors. And that stemmed from the fact that the coercive model that we have today although it's attributed to Evan Stark, actually came from a guy called Biderman, and he did that research on prisoners of war.
Okay.
And so to me, it was I really like going back to primary sources, especially when it comes to theory, because I think once you get into the nit grit of where this actually stems from, you've got a far better understanding of it. So I then was. I'm going back a couple of years ago. I was looking through this in real detail, and I also came across an academic called Alexandra Stein, who was a cult survivor and then used that experience to research about cult survivors.
Okay.
She was doing a webcast, a live webcast, and I asked her a question of, do you think these elements would be applicable to victims of domestic abuse? Certainly coercive control, because the trauma that I'm looking at with domestic abuse isn't like the trauma of natural disasters or disease or anything like that. This is a 24/7 trapped, enforced abuse. And she said, absolutely. So I started doing some research on that. But then I actually started taking it a step further and thinking, because a lot of the stuff I was seeing when I get attacked on social media from that particular feminist element was very much in line with attributes of coercive control, blended with trauma reaction, blended with all sorts of things. But what I noticed is that reaction from, oh, what a great researcher you are, to heretic, absolutely lined up with what Alexandra Stein was talking about. Once you're in the cult, if you try to escape, you have to be utterly denigrated because you serve as an example of what would happen if the others leave.
Yes.
Now, feminism seems to do that in the picture I'm seeing, because if you, as a woman, not trying to steal a feminist line who seems to open every sentence with as a woman,
no.
But as a woman, if I say I don't agree with feminism, I will get a level of an abuse that I've never ever had from a man on social media, and it will stem from, are you a woman, to your one woman actually said to me, you don't sound like a victim. I'm a pick-me, I'm a misogynist, whatever is the flavour of the month for whatever bullshit name they come out with. And I thought to myself, why would anyone, instead of just asking me, because they automatically assume that I hate women, that I'm some kind of slut that spends thousands of pounds and hours of every day of her life researching this just so that a man can come along and pick me. There's all sorts of crap going on, but why is it from 0 to 5,000 in 240 characters? So it led me to start digging into all this. Why are people in this group? How do they get into this group? Why do they have this worldview? Why is it all such a... And it's a cult. It's an absolute cult. I can't think of any better way of describing it.
Yeah. And, that's certainly been something that has been, kind of pointed at before. But the person that immediately springs to mind as an example of this is, of course, Erin Pizzey, who, kind of is one of the classic examples of whenever she kind of stepped out of line from that narrative.
Yes.
Kind of she
Erin and I have spoken about this at length on many of occasions.
And she's not unique. I mean, anybody who steps away from feminism does seem to get, battered more so than,
I suppose, and again, Erin and I have spoken about this, as I have with a lot of people that including Tom.
Sure.
I have, we might get onto this, it might be another time.
Sure.
I'm a survivor of domestic abuse.
Okay.
Perpetrated by a man.
Okay.
And every single level of domestic abuse that you can think about, I can give you many examples of how that happened to me. Okay. and it was horrific. And
I'm
then
sorry to hear that.
thank you, but I had, and the abuse continued post separation, where I was actually dragged in and out of court for longer than I was married.
Okay. Right.
So I've done my time, as it were, in that. Yeah. But one of the things, and my supervisor makes a joke that I should be the poster child for the feminist movement, but I'm not. Yeah. Because there was a lot of stuff that went on in there that made me question the whole situation around me. One was I was very much treated like I was broken, and I'm not.
Sure. Yeah.
The other one was I had to represent myself for a lot of the time. Just before the legal aid finished, my ex-partner, who has never worked, he got legal aid, but I was working full time and I didn't. Okay. So I had to pay, and because he had legal aid, he would just drag me into court willy-nilly. It was a no cost to him. Yeah. But I couldn't afford to keep having a solicitor and a barrister and everything else. So in the end, I had to represent myself. So you get to learn the ins and outs of things very quickly.
Yes.
But as part of that, what I had to do was be in a position where I could go and research all the laws and all the things I wanted to do, put together a whole load of evidence, and then speak in court in a manner that a judge could understand where I was coming from. Yeah. So I would be in court and I would be able to speak logically and say, represent myself, say why I didn't think I should be in court, explain what was going on, all the rest of it. To the point where in one of the many times that I was in court, there was a particular part when we were discussing the children where we were in a magistrate's court. Before then, we'd just been in a normal family court. And there was 3 magistrates and there was the clerk of the court. And I was sat there and I was representing myself what I thought was very well. Believe me, beneath that logical front, sure. I hadn't slept for days, I hadn't ate for days. I was absolutely trembling. We were talking about, hello. We were talking about, as far as I was concerned, I was defending my children. Yeah. And we were in a situation where I was terrified for their well-being. So I wasn't in any way taking this lightly. But because once I was there, I was able to take a deep breath and communicate what I wanted to say. One of the magistrates actually said to me, "You're not acting like a victim." And it hit me like a dagger in the heart of, so how am I just supposed to not do this preparation? Am I not supposed to be as prepared as I can be to defend the well-being of my children? And I actually don't think she meant it in any malicious way. I don't think she was saying, "You're not a victim." I think she was genuinely surprised. You're not acting like a victim. And I think that's why it actually came out of her mouth. Yeah. But it made me think, what does a victim act like then? Is there a template that I'm absolutely not following? Because if there is a template and I need to follow that in order to protect my children, someone please tell me what it is, because I'll fit it.
Yes.
Do you see what I mean? So, and then I thought, well, how can I fit that? What is it? What does it look like? Where does it come from? Who's fashioned this? Do you know what I mean? It led me to so many questions.
Well, I mean, if I can interject, kind of certainly the I think that sort of sits with the whole thing about kind of perceptions of victims and who gets the kind of sympathy.
Yes.
Because I've been in places in my life where I felt like a victim. And I know that sort of the way out of it for me certainly has been, a crucial element is to assert my right not to be treated like that.
Yes, I'm very of that ilk.
Yeah, and that can, involve having to kind of be very assertive, which is not necessarily what people perceive victims to be.
But the difference is between you and I, sure. And I'm going to play my privilege card. I think women are very privileged in this world.
We both have our privileges, but yeah.
But in that situation, I could well be seen as empowered where you would be seen as angry.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And it would be, and the reverse is true, that if you kind of turn the waterworks on, kind of, and that's certainly kind of where I was going with, in terms of that, where you're kind of getting assistance from a care provider to give, to advise you as to how to act like a victim, then potentially, kind of, you might have been advised to act in a different way.
Yes.
Which might not, kind of might have got the outcome that you were looking for, but might not have been the healthiest way to get that outcome, possibly.
Yeah, and ultimately, I just think I think a bit differently. I think about, in that situation, not only was I thinking about me, I was thinking about the impact on my children, because I was the only parent that they had that was providing structure and stability and all the rest of it. As much as I didn't feel that I had any stability internally.
Sure. Yeah.
But I also understood, even then, before I was in psychology, that I have to be the truth sayer to my children.
Yes.
Not just at that particular juncture, but also when they are older, where they may come back to me and say, what happened in this situation? And they also might point the finger at me and say, why didn't you do things differently?
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to explain my actions to my 18-year-old children, not just my tiny children.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to sleep knowing that I didn't do this with the waterworks or with anything else that I wasn't feeling. If I was crying because I genuinely felt that, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I'm on about manipulating.
Yes.
I didn't want to manipulate. I wanted to put my point across in as honest and as logical way as I possibly could, so that there's no way anyone could misinterpret that, because I want my children to be able to question me. I want them to say what happened in that situation, and me to be able to answer honestly.
Yes. And I think that's, kind of pulling it back to the brick wall that one tends to get from feminism. That is one of the most difficult points, I think, for people like, I'm assuming for people like yourself, because you would be entirely capable of kind of having a robust, discussion with them about this area in a civilized manner. And the kind of the main gatekeeping to that is just a very childish wall of silence.
Yeah.
Basically, it's very childish.
It's what that whole situation opened up to me is, if there's a template for me, how does that fit with everything else? And that's where my research went. So it went from, and believe me, I was very much of this is something that happens to women.
Sure.
It wasn't something that was the forefront of my mind. It's just the way I understood domestic abuse. It wasn't something I debated. It was just common knowledge. And so when I went back to university, I went back to do a master's, and I suppose the motivation behind that was I needed to understand how I got myself into that situation. Because my background was there was no abuse in my background. I had a very stable and supportive family background, completely working class. Sometimes we were skint, sometimes we were well off, usual, just an ordinary childhood, but no abuse. My mum and dad had arguments like everybody else, had rows, loved each other, got annoyed with each other, everything normal, okay? not painting perfect, I'm painting normal. So, and then I went to university, got my undergrad, went and got a career, was very well paid, had all the trappings of success, ran into this. How did that happen? Because again, the narrative of how women get abused and how they find themselves in this did not fit with my passive life. How did that? I wasn't dependent on him for money. I wasn't dependent on him for my way of life or my career or my knowledge or anything else. What happened? And when I started to get to reading about domestic abuse, I was very fortunate to be in a school of psychology that John Archer was at. Don't know if you know John Archer. He did the first meta-analysis that showed women were equally as aggressive to their partners, if not slightly more than men.
Okay.
So it's, if you read anything about a gender-neutral approach to domestic abuse, John Archer will be in there.
Okay.
And my supervisor now is Nicola Graham Kevin, Professor Nicola Graham Kevin.
Yes.
And I don't know if you know her work, but
I saw her talk in Dublin last year, and I'm keen to interview her at some point as well. Interesting work. Yeah, but go on.
She's fabulous. So you go along and you give a question when you're with your supervisor. I'm thinking this.
Yeah.
And what Nikki's very good at is, okay, go prove it. So every time I came back with a question, but I was also looking for someone. I said, look, I don't fit this template of victim. Doesn't fit with me. Don't know where it comes from. Okay, go away and do some research. I'll come back and and again, can you imagine? This is me coming back and going, did you know this many men are victims of domestic abuse? Yeah, maybe go and have a bit more of a look at that. And she kind of guided me.
Okay.
Very gently, just a couple of nudges here and there. Maybe go and have a look at this, and maybe go and have a look at that. But my second supervisor was started out in feminist literature, and she would just bring that in as well and go, well, have you looked at this? So I've got a really nice balance of, this is where this literature comes from. Maybe not agree with it, but you need to understand it. And this is the sort of gender neutral research. And it baffles me that we have this huge amount of research, massive, and I'm talking serious level of studies, huge numbers, not like 20 women were asked questions about this, or like the Duluth model with 12 women were asked why they do this, or whatever. I'm talking tens of thousands in these studies, and we just ignore them.
Yeah.
So I then got introduced to Erin, and spent some time down in London with Erin, and she's sort of filling in the start of this, and I'm thinking, oh right, so not only do we now have this huge body of evidence, most of which was kind of kicked off by feminist researchers, that shows that there's symmetry across perpetration. But actually, we knew this from day dot.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
And that led me to another stream of the investigation, and then more and more and more. And all of a sudden, it really is like a jigsaw or one of those magic eye pictures. That all of a sudden, as you put a piece in and then the focus starts to move in, you realise that what's happened with domestic abuse is that it has been held up as the poster child of patriarchy.
Yeah.
But it's got no substance for that.
Yeah.
There's nothing about it. All it is people shouting because it's this. When actually I could say, well, feminism says that women are victimized by men because they are women.
Yeah.
That holds as much substance to me as women are victimized by men because of unicorns.
Yeah.
It's a hokum.
It's absolute hokum, and it's
dangerous.
It's dangerous.
But it's dangerous to the people they profess they are protecting.
Yes, and that's actually that's what I want to get to now, because I've read your excellent chapter along with Nicola in the Palgrave.
Palgrave, yeah.
Palgrave, yeah. And essentially that chapter completely debunks both the Duluth kind of approach, but kind of sort of very much just lays out
That's the way my head works. It's just
it's brilliantly done. It sets out, it establishes as much of that empirical data as you need around, what the reality of what domestic abuse is, why it happens, and the numbers of people it impacts. And one of the things that sort of jumped out at me was, and this is something that's always fascinated me in terms of domestic abuse, or I think it's a kind of a key conversation to have at all times, is that even champions of men's human rights and just sort of champions of getting help to the people that need it, regardless of what their sex is, can very often get sort of kind of bogged down in this, well, kind of such and such percentage are female, such and such victims are female, such and such victims are male, and so you get sort of stuck in that construct. And the key fact that sort of jumps out at me is that the majority of incidents of domestic violence involve bilateral perpetration.
Yes.
So, couples that are going at each other. And the point that you make in that chapter is very much about how that impacts on women, and potentially women who end up on that list of dead women that Jess Phillips. So do you want to say a bit about that?
Yeah. So the most common form of domestic abuse is bilateral.
Yeah.
So they're both equally as aggressive and or violent. Not necessarily at the same time. This might not be a fist fight. It could be, but it might be one against the other one day, one against the other the next, both at it whenever.
Yeah.
So then there's a huge amount of data that says then the second most common form of domestic abuse is women being aggressive and or violent against non-violent men.
Okay.
Then the third is men being aggressive and or violent against non-violent women. So men, this whole idea of patriarchal domestic abuse comes in at number 3 on the chart of most common forms of domestic abuse. But what we also know is one of the key indicators of harm to women, and I'm talking physical harm, psychological harm, which incidentally is obviously more long-term than physical harm. One of the key indicators of a risk of being physically or psychologically harmed is perpetration of abuse.
Yeah.
So break that down out of the academic arena into normal speaking, you're more likely to get hurt because you kick off first.
Yeah.
Okay. So by denying that women do this, we're not treating one of the key indicators that's going to get them hurt.
Yes.
Why not? Why not? And at this point, as someone who researches victims, at this point, I don't care what the motivation is. I don't care if she thinks it's self-defense or she's jealous or she's angry or she has formulated the way to communicate outside of the emotions, or it's learnt behaviour, or it's trauma response, whichever one of those many things, none of which are because she's a woman, by the way. What we're doing is letting them down. We need to actually have a look at these and say, we need to do something with you.
Yeah.
Also, what it forgets in that situation is a lot of these couples absolutely do want to stay together.
Yeah.
They want to stay together. And actually, if we could just sort out, and I know just is a small word for a very, very big issue,
Okay.
if we could sort out the dynamic of this relationship and or their reaction to whatever the conflict is, and as humans, we have to adapt to conflict.
Yeah.
Certainly within families, within life, you've got to train your kids how to deal with conflict, and sort it out. If we're not doing that, if we're just transmuting any act of aggression or violence by a woman into a patriarchal reaction of victimhood, we're going to fuck them up.
Yeah.
And they will end up, there's a likelihood, however small, that they're going to end up on that list of dead women.
Yeah.
So it's a self-perpetuating. And that's before we then start looking at women that are the primary aggressor against a non-violent man, and before we start looking at children being in the same household where this happens. So we're letting everybody down.
No, absolutely, and that that's what I was going to sort of carry the conversation to kind of to essentially leave men out of it for the time being. In terms of the purported aims of these kind of feminist-led organizations that are there to help women primarily and children.
Yes.
The secondary, kind of issue is the impact on children, both in terms of where they live in homes where both parents are kind of perpetrating aggressive behavior, either they're witnessing it or perhaps they're kind of experiencing it, whether physically or psychologically. But then also by ignoring female perpetration, there's plenty of data there, out there about female perpetration of abuse, domestic abuse against children.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you a question as a psychologist.
Okay.
And I'll sort of prime it with a sort of I'll share something from my philosophy. I kind of try to be a sort of glass half full kind of person, and I do have a kind of sort of fairly genuine belief in life that most people are acting from a place of good intention.
Yes.
Okay. So
I'm very similar ilk, strangely enough.
Okay. So assuming that everybody who's involved in those sort of organizations are not just purely in it for the money or for the career or, for whatever, and assuming that they must at some point, if they're working in that sort of professional capacity, come across evidence that would, as such as we've just discussed, why do you think they don't act on it?
Well, if I'm just looking at it from a purely psychological view, it's about your worldview and how you construct where you see yourself and your beliefs in the world. We all carry a set of views, and they tend to develop from childhood. Your parents have a set of views. If you're religious, you're likely to be. If your parents are religious, you're likely to at least have some element of knowledge, even of religion, even if it's not belief. Even take a construct like a football team. Often football teams are supported from father to son. Even rebellion when they don't. Is like that. Well, one will go the other way because they're rebelling against the parents, but we construct a worldview. So, if a lot of people that end up working in these industries have experienced domestic abuse of some description, and if you're looking predominantly at the female-based, gender-based organisations, they tend to be female victims of male perpetrated abuse.
Yes.
Now, I'm gonna move back now into that idea of cult. And what I've been, the way I'm formulating this is, again, reading the information. Cults prey on vulnerable people, and they'll put themselves in places where vulnerable people are more likely to be. Now, if you're a feminist-based organisation that's also pals with the other feminist organisations, and you have a national domestic abuse helpline, or you have a forum, or you have whatever, and the police guide you there, and the counsellors guide you there, everything else, you're literally funneling in people with the same experience as you straight through the door. Now, victims want to be or are lacking validation of their experience, especially victims of domestic abuse, because the likelihood is, certainly if it's coercively controlling, is that you've been told that you are dirt. So I can completely understand that if a female victim of male perpetrated domestic abuse goes to a charity or an organisation that is there for that particular victim, they will tell that victim a particular story. That is, yes, you have been a victim of male perpetrated domestic abuse. Okay. However, one they tag on the end of that is because you're a woman, which then moves it from a reality into ideology.
Yeah.
Now, if you're a female victim of domestic abuse, it's quite an easy answer to a very, 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 very complicated question. I went back to university and am now conducting a PhD because I wanted to understand how I got myself into this situation. So if you're not academically minded or you're not that way inclined, having the option of it's because you're a woman puts a full stop there and gives you meaning to that whole suffering. Now, that meaning is flawed for a number of reasons. The fact that it is on a comparable level to because unicorns. It's also because as a victim of domestic abuse, how can you then find trust in the world if they are saying to you by accident of birth you are a victim of abuse? How do you get over that as a victim? There's no. Did you see what I mean? That's it. You're done. You're victimized forever because you're a woman. It doesn't hold enough for me with someone who wants to create a model that helps victims move forward. That is bullshit. It's as coercive as someone saying you're dirt.
It's always struck me, and I should say I've as an adult I've never experienced any kind of relationship abuse or perpetration either, kind of difficulties like that. But it has absolutely always struck me that sort of that issue about kind of surviving and overcoming it. That to get to the place where you are kind of have moved on from it.
Now they label it empowerment.
Yeah. But it's I mean, how can you do that if you're born as a victim?
But it's not recovery. It's not recovery.
Okay, right.
There's a big difference between empowerment and recovery. Okay, and we need to make that straight off the bat. This is not about people actually coming to terms with their victimization and coming to terms with how they're going to have to adapt to it. This is shit, and it's happened to you, and you're going to have to deal with it. You're going to have to grieve some things. You're going to have to learn a lot about yourself. This is not a simple process. So, and it's not as simple as because unicorns. So, empowerment, from what I'm seeing, is get angry, tell men to fuck off, shout at the world. If anyone challenges you, you tell them you're a victim of abuse. And as a victim of abuse, you're going to say, you can't talk to me like that. 2 women a week die at the hands of a man. Women are far more harmed than men. And it's literally a parable, because every time I encounter a new person on Twitter that's throwing out the usual shit, and I think, do I get involved? In the words of Ricky Gervais, I should have left it, but I can't. There's something in me, and I say, well, actually, the data doesn't say that. And then I set my watch, and I kind of think, how many tweets can I put out before they call me a name? And it's usually within 3. If you go back on any thread that I've been involved with, I usually say, that's not what the data says. And they go, what data? And I go, do you want it? And they say, yeah. So I then give them data, and they go, well, that's because it's used this method. And I go, well, that's not true because this, that, and the other. And they go, yeah, but 2 women a week. And I go, yeah, but actually, if you break that down as a percentage, it doesn't negate the 786,000 male victims, does it? And why would you want to do that anyway? And usually that's the point where they go, pick me, misogynist, blah, blah, blah. Now, it's because I am shaking their world order. I am shaking everything that they might be holding on to that's keeping them safe. I don't think they actually, if they were to sit in front of me now and meet me and have a conversation with me and see my children and the chicken jumping over the wall and stuff, I don't think they'd see me as some hateful, horrible person that wants to fuck them up.
Yeah.
But I am shaking the things that the psalms, as it were,
Yes.
that they have been told 2 women a week. This happens to women because they are women, and it's literally drummed into them from the second they pick that phone up and say, "Can you help me?"
Yes.
So and then on comes me and goes, "Oh no. That's not how it works."
Yes.
So, but then where do they go? Because then they're trapped, and this is why I think this is a cult, because they have been told that if you stay in this group of feminism, you are safe. If you step out of that, that's where all the bad monsters are, all the monster men, or even worse, the people like me who lure you in so that the men can get you. You know, I'm like Myra Hindley in this setup. I'm the one that's luring them out of the safety so that I can let the men get at them.
There's nothing more damned than a non-feminist female.
Well, hands up, that's me.
Much worse than a man.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
But so that's what causes this reaction, because for a lot of people, they have to believe in this because that's the thing that's keeping them safe. That's their armor at the minute. And that armor is dictated. And this is why you see such a reaction to the non-feminist women, because they have to make an example of me. Because if that person that's currently empowered by feminism steps out of that line, they need to know that not only will they be pushed out and the big bad men out there will get them, but also all their mates will go at them, and you'll have nobody, and you'll be out there on your own, and it'll all be horrible.
And just to move outside of the kind of immediate box of, let's say, the feminist cults, I'm reminded of the time whenever we were looking for a successor to Theresa May, Prime Minister, who had famously worn the T-shirt, "This is what a feminist looks like." And some journalists took it upon themselves to seek an answer from every person, potentially lined up for the competition, as to whether or not they identified as feminist or not. And obviously, and Boris obviously said, "Of course I do," to it, too much ridiculousness. But the point I'm getting at is, in terms of the question, to bring it back to the question that you've been asking of refuge and of the Home Office particularly, do you think that outside of the kind of feminist bubble and more in sort of in the seats of power of governments, is there an element of fear about answering that question?
Yeah. We've kind of just touched on the level of attack that's instantaneous there. And you have to remember that politicians are temporary entities.
Yes.
It's as much as we'd like to think that we can, that the whole world is going to have this theory that they've put forward, they are temporary entities.
Yeah.
And there's a certain, believe me when I say that feminists are very powerful, completely powerful. There's this idea of an old boys network has got nothing on the old girls network, because it becomes hateful quite quickly. Now, even if as a woman I get the scrawny finger of misogyny pointed directly at me if I challenge this worldview, how can a man cope with that?
Yeah.
Because mud sticks. And misogynist is now on par with paedophile. It has that. If one person points the finger in Parliament of misogynist, that's it. All of a sudden, that the view of what you are as a person kind of just falls in line for every single aspect of your life. So I'm a misogynist because I see domestic abuse as a gender-free issue. So obviously I'm a white supremacist.
Yeah.
I don't believe in climate change. I clearly believe that the Earth is flat.
Your name probably will be going into a police record for a hate crime sometime soon.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course. I'm racist. All those different elements that they associate with that kind of just domino effect into place. So it must be terrifying. I would not be a politician ever in that situation.
Yeah.
Even if I was offered the role, because it would constrain me. I wouldn't be able to say the things that I say. So I can completely understand why they kind of just nod and say, of course I'm a feminist. Because the threat, you know yourself, like you said about wearing that T-shirt, this is what a feminist looks like. What would then happen in every single press conference?
Yeah.
Ever. You know, it would be like, the questions would be, as a misogynist, why are you giving this funding to women? Clearly you don't believe in feminist theory, you know, and you just know that's, and then the headline the next day is misogynist Boris, or this, that, and the other.
And the key difference, I like the thing about the boys network. It strikes me the key difference about the old boys network is, you know, the kind of popular opinion is against, and possibly never was particularly with, the old boys network, because it was a very exclusive kind of network. Whereas, you know, kind of popular opinion, most people don't think about this thing. And how can you take funding away from women and children?
Yes.
Oh,
because
yeah.
this is where this template of victimhood comes from.
Yeah.
This is why it's beneficial to maintain a number of victims as broken forever.
Yes.
Because that keeps that stream going. How could you possibly just toss these poor women and children to the curb and not provide us with another £20 million worth of funding? You know, that's how it's done. That's why I described it as a poster child of domestic abuse, and how this is propaganda and propaganda serves a number of purposes. It isn't just about money. It's also about fear. Propaganda is an absolute fear. And that's why you have these people watching you. You know, that's why Jess Phillips sits on a meeting going, ha ha, isn't every day International Men's Day?
Yes.
Who's going to question her? No man in that room is going to go, every single man in that room is thinking, shut the fuck up. But no man in that room has that golden ticket to actually say bullshit.
Yes.
Now, the difference with someone like me is I have a number of cards that I hold, and I don't know how much of my tweets you see on Twitter.
Quite a few,
Often when I put some information out, someone will hurtle in and say, and again, I always think it's someone who's experienced this and is holding on to this worldview for every bit of survival. They usually come in and say, oh yeah, but it's this, that, and the other. Or they start the sentence, as a survivor of domestic abuse, I think your research is this. And I respond, me too, as also a survivor of domestic abuse. And you can see them thinking, shit. What do I say now? Because now, right, you've played that card. What next? You've done the woman. You've done the victim's card. I see your victim's card. I see your women's card. And I raise you a PhD researcher card.
Yes. And that, absolutely.
And then that's when it goes into misogynist, pick me, because that's what they do. They use these cards to silence men. They silence you. What do you come back with that?
And that's why, from a psychological perspective, and my background is psychology as well, by the way, I find this fascinating that the house of cards crumbles so quickly if you know your stuff, and so quickly they're revealed as behaving like petulant children.
Yes.
Whether that's kind of lashing out or just pretending you don't exist, kind of just like ignore.
Exactly.
Finishing the conversation.
It's this idea that you have to be angry and you have to be screaming in the face of something to overturn it, when actually teach these women that are going through trauma, that may not be able to deal with conflict in the way that we expect adults to do that for whatever reason. Say to them, okay, this is how you're better placed to get your argument over. Maybe it wouldn't have such a detrimental effect on your cortisol levels, on your physical levels, on your sleep levels, if you were able to manage this better.
Yeah.
Rather than just be empowered and fucking angry.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? And it leaves them without the appropriate treatment.
Strong words indeed about a very serious issue. My thanks again to Deborah for talking sense, not sensibility. Don't forget to find out more about her work by following the links below, and thank you very much for taking the time to listen. If you want to help me to keep generating hopefully quality and insightful content like this, then please share this podcast, hit the like button, subscribe to The Glass Blind Spot, and don't forget to leave a comment. It only takes a minute, doesn't cost you a penny, but would make a big difference to me, help to grow this channel, and ultimately help to keep this show on the road. Thanks again, and as always, don't forget, if you see an elephant,
can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.
The Glass Blind Spot is brought to you by you, because it's your views, your likes and your comments that keep this show on the road.